Hey everybody, how you guys doing? Give me a shout out in the chat box. Let me know that you can all hear me. I feel like the room that I'm in today is like super reverby. Are you guys hearing that too? Like lots of echo in here. I'm coming to you from a cave today. Okay, cool. So everyone's here. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. So actually, before we get to that, let's talk about the breakout sessions, because I think everyone's got a lot of questions about that. So I want to kind of go over a couple things real quick. The breakout, the response to the breakout sessions has been amazing. And what we've ended up having to do is add more sessions, which is awesome. So we added one yesterday because the slots filled up pretty quickly. And then what we're going to be doing, Ryan and I are going to chat today a little bit about where we can add more, because I know that there's still some of you guys who really want to make those sessions. So right now we're up to four sessions. We'll probably be adding 5, possibly a 6, but I really kind of want to see where you guys are and how much, if there's a demand for it, you know, we'll have more and more and more. So. So that's what's kind of happening with the breakout sessions right now. Next week is going to be the first time that we actually start doing the breakout sessions. So this will actually be our last Thursday class in a webinar. From now on, we'll be doing it in small group style through Google Hangouts. So that should be exciting as well. What will be really cool is that, you know, we can all kind of talk in a sense, right? So right now, you guys are all muted by default, and if I have a question or anything, like, you guys can't answer. You can, but you have to type it, right? So it'll be really nice for us to all kind of just talk to each other, and it'll become much more of a more similar to what I think a classroom experience kind of is. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are too. Okay, so. Let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. So this week we talked a lot about, as I'm sure you all have already watched the videos from week 2, we did a lot of, that's going to bother me. All right, there we go. We talked a lot about sort of buttons, right? We did some stuff on mesh organization. We talked about polygroups and selection and stuff like that. We also talked about grids and that kind of thing. But the one thing that, I don't know about you guys, but for me, the one thing that is exciting, and I think that there's a lot more to talk about, is when we start talking about actually creating mesh on the fly, so to speak, right? So Ryan went over his maquette workflow in the practicum, and he did a section on it in the lectures. And one of the things with that is kind of using insert mesh brushes to put in spheres, block out all the forms, and then dynamesh at the end, and get everything all as one solid mesh that you can then start working from. And that's something that, you know, if you've been around for a little while and maybe you've been an on-again, off-again user of ZBrush for the past, you know, 3 years or more, you'll remember a time when that wasn't even conceivable, right? That was not possible at all. The best thing that you could do is use some Z-spheres or do some Z-sphere retopology, or otherwise you just had to bring something in from another modeling program. Right? There weren't, there was never really a way to kind of create on the fly like we can with Dynamesh. So I want to talk a little bit more about that today. We went over a maquette workflow using insert mesh brushes with Ryan. What I'm going to show you today is going to be more along the lines, and I just screwed up my drawing tool. Give me a second. Okay. Anyways, sorry guys. So we're going to be doing kit bashing today, right? And this is, we're going to be talking about kit bashing more in the sense that it's used in some concepting phases, right? And what you might see coming out of things like, for instance, we just recently had the Bad King Monster Brush Challenge. So if you're familiar with that, it's sort of that method, right, of using an insert multi-mesh brush, which is going to be a new word for us today, insert multi-mesh brush. And we're jumping a little bit ahead with that, but it's kind of important to this workflow. So we're just going to talk a little bit about how to use it, and we'll leave all the details on it for later on in this course. So we talk about kit bashing. We're going to be talking about the IMM brushes. We're going to talk about topology. And I want to give you guys a real simple breakdown of topology for those who might be struggling with it a little bit. We're also going to talk about Dynamesh because it's central to this workflow. And then mesh replacement. And how many of you guys have used mesh replacement before? Just give me a shout out. Anyone used mesh replacement? I'm seeing lots of nevers. Nope, nope. Oh, this is going to be exciting. So it looks like most of you haven't used it. So that's great. Not great for you because you're missing out, but great for my lesson today because it's going to be all wow and awesome. So we'll talk about mesh replacement, and then there's a bunch of cool things we can do with mesh replacement. So we'll talk about that. We're just basically going to create a couple characters, right, just kind of on the fly. And we want to get it to the point where we could start, it's sort of usable, right? We're not looking for perfect forms. We're basically looking for some kind of rough base mesh that I can start actually sculpting on and find those forms, right? So, and then at the end, we're going to have, I want to have an extended Q&A at the end. Because it seems like we're far enough in now, you guys are sort of getting the lay of the land a little bit, and I think some questions are starting to come up. So we're going to talk, I kind of want to open up the floor at the end here, and we'll take maybe about half an hour or so and see if we can get some questions answered for you guys. I have a few that were sent to me already that we'll be covering. So, and actually I'm writing one down that I almost forgot right now, so I don't forget it at the end. So we'll talk about that. So if you have any questions, anything that's kind of been bugging you for a little while or anything like that, I just saw a question, I think, about brushes that create topology. I'll do that one as well. I'll show you that. And some of this stuff it's a little bit on the advanced side, a little bit far ahead of where we are right now. So it's sort of up to you. You know, you can listen or you don't have to necessarily, right? I don't want you guys to get overloaded. But what we'll do is, like I said, we'll have the extended Q&A at the end. So feel free to get your questions ready and then shoot them through at the end when we start opening up the floor for that kind of stuff, and we'll get through as many as we can. But other than that, I think we can kind of get started. Any other questions just about what we're going over, about breakout sessions, anything like that before we really kind of dig in and get started? Give me a shout out. I will take your silence as a no. Charles, no, the breakout sessions aren't going to be recorded. They will not be recorded. Thomas, what do you do to sign up? Well, we sent out a little spreadsheet to you guys a little while ago. If you haven't gotten that, you should have an email in your inbox with the link to that. Although everything is full right now. So, like I said, Ryan and I are going to be chatting later on today, and we're going to kind of figure out what other times we can open up, to do that. So, oh, on the Google end of it. Okay, yeah, not a problem. So it's a good idea to have a Gmail account because you're going to want to sign up for Google+. And the Hangout sessions usually run better in Chrome. So my suggestion to you would be get a Google Plus account, download Chrome, the browser, right, the internet browser from Google Chrome. So once you have those two things, we will be sending you guys everything else that you need. So it'll just be essentially you'll all get a link. You follow that link. Come time for the actual breakout session to begin, just follow that link and we'll hop into a Google Hangout session. I'll be there. Ryan may be there from time to time. And that's it. And we just kind of hang out and we'll all kind of, the idea here is going to be, I'll do some demo similar to what I'm doing today, but we'll also have a little bit more back and forth where you guys can actually have ZBrush up and we can all sort of be sculpting together. And you guys can, it's going to be a really nice way for you guys to get one-on-one feedback right away. All right, let me read some of our other questions here. Mark, technical tricks to work with reference material. Yes, I saw your email about this. Spotlight is a good one. So yeah, let me put that at the end. We have a couple things that are very demo worthy. So if we can get to that, we will. But if we don't worry, it is coming. So let's see. Using reference. Okay. Raven, if you can't get Chrome on your computer, it shouldn't be a problem. It does work with Firefox just fine. It's just, well, not necessarily always just fine. It usually works a lot better with Chrome. You're going to have less problems. You may run into some errors and stuff in Firefox from time to time. Just sort of buggy stuff. It's only happened to me once or twice, though, before, so you'll probably be fine. Reese, do you need to add your Gmail account to the ZBrush Workshops account? No. The only thing that you'll need to do is when you follow that link that you're sent, you just sign in with a Gmail account. All of the links and stuff will still be sent to the account that you already have registered through ZBrush Workshops. Just reading down through the other questions here. Jose, which sessions, or how many sessions are we supposed to attend? Just one, Jose, just one. All right, I think we are about ready to get started. Patrick, can you create different subtools from a unique subtool? I think I understand what you're talking about. Let's go over that again at the end. So I'm going to write down subtool question. Okay, cool. All right, so now we're starting to get into more ZBrush questions. So let's get through the demo, and then we'll open up to have a bunch of Q&A stuff like that so we can kind of get all your questions answered. So, like I said, we're talking a lot about kit bashing today. And before we really get into kit bashing and talking about the workflow of building out your mesh, the essence of that is that you're creating topology, right? So everything that you add in, you're creating new topology every single time you add something new. So it's kind of, I think, important to have a discussion about topology. And let me see if I can turn down the width of this thing. Okay. So you guys can still see that, yeah? Is the red okay? Can you see my handwriting okay? Cool, cool, cool. Alrighty. So, topology. Now, is anyone, if I say, what's good topology? Who knows? Does anyone out there, if I asked you what is good topology, what would your answer be? And I'll give you a hint. This is a trick question. Mark says, good for what purpose? Exactly. Exactly. So what's good for sculpting isn't necessarily what is good for production, right? So one thing that I like to talk about whenever we talk about topology, and maybe this is old news to you, but if your plan is to kind of leave here and start thinking about actually teaching this to others, this is a really nice way to get people to understand topology, all right? Because it can get really confusing really quickly, especially if you're kind of new to all of this. So I like to break it down into 3 distinct sections. Topology comes in 3 flavors, basically, right? You've got sculpting topology. You've got production topology. And you've got junk topology. All right? So this is the way that I like to kind of present this. Sculpting topology, it's pretty self-explanatory. Sculpting topology is really meant for sculpting, right? You want to be able to get the most detail out of it. And what that basically means is you want even tessellation. Tessellation. And I probably butchered that spelling. Even tessellation. So you want a bunch of squares that are as square as possible, essentially, right? Yeah, it's fine if there's some stretching and stuff, but for the most part, you know, you're going to be probably baking maps from this and that kind of thing. So you want to have as much resolution as possible. So you get that even tessellation. Production, on the other hand, can vary dramatically, right? So in some cases, the production topology is very similar to this, where you kind of have to have even tessellation across the board. For others, it can be much, much different, right? You can have very stretched polygons here and there. But in the end, what you can kind of boil down production topology to, even though it's going to be different everywhere you work, production topology really, we're talking about, is it good for animation? All right? Production topology equals animation, right? So that means I have to have organized edge loops. I have to make sure that, you know, when I hand this off to the animation department, or if I have to rig this thing, once it rigs, all the deformations are going to happen nice and smoothly. There's not going to be much of a problem, right? So production equals animation. And then junk topology is just that. It's junk, right? There's not really, it's going to be real hard to sculpt on. It's definitely not good for animation. It's just kind of, in a sense, it's like the other, right? And there's a lot of different ways you can get junk topology. So it's like, you know, you could maybe you've decimated something, right? That's a real fast way. That will absolutely 100% without beyond a shadow of a doubt give you junk topology, right? If you're familiar with Boolean operations in some other programs, like junk topology is what you're going to get out of it, essentially. If I were to run a Boolean operation on a polygon surface inside of Maya, for instance, that's going to give me junk topology, right? It's going to give me a bunch of n-gons or a bunch of tries. It's like, it's not going to be good for me at all. Okay? Georgie, Booleans are a real pain in Maya. Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. I prefer anymore to do any Boolean operations that I have to do inside of ZBrush because it's so much easier. Okay. So that's kind of the gist of topology. All right, sculpting, production, and junk. And I wanted to show you guys an example of each, right? So we have this here is just a head that's been dynameshed. This has given me good sculpting topology, right? You all know what dynamesh topology looks like at this point. See, I have these very even squares everywhere, right? With a few tries mixed in. In the middle here we have our production topology. And there we can see how well organized this is, right? We've got all of these edge rings around the eye, we've got edge rings around the mouth and all that kind of stuff that are going to make this ideal for our animation, right? And then this here is just a decimated version of that head. And this is junk topology, right? Poorly decimated, I'll add. All right? And basically it's just giving us a bunch of triangles. And there's no rhyme or reason necessarily to the, well, there is a reason to the placement of the triangles, but we'll get to that later. That's not something you talk about today. All right? Deborah says she lost sound. Are you guys still with me? No. Okay, cool. Cool. All right, so as far as topology is concerned, does that kind of make sense? Raymond or Ramon, he's asking, so is junk topology for rapid prototyping? No. And the reason I kind of pause there is because in some cases, like let's say I'm doing some rapid prototyping that is meant to go to print, sometimes, actually nearly all the time, I'm going to need to decimate my mesh. But that comes at the end, right? That's not something that I do when I'm sculpting or anything like that. Okay, so cool. How can junk topology be created? Just sculpted badly? No, actually, junk topology generally is going to be a result of something like decimation, like Boolean operations in other programs. If any of you use something like Google SketchUp, for instance, right? Google SketchUp just will create all of these awful n-gons everywhere, right? And an n-gon is basically, if you don't know, an n-gon is basically just any polygon with more than 4 vertices. So what ends up happening is you get a bunch of tries and it's awful, and that kind of comes in as junk topology as well. Right? There's no real flow. There's no edge flow. Okay. Okay. So let's. Can you Z-remesh junk topology? Of course you can. Of course you can. Yeah. But we're not getting into Z-remesher yet. I know you guys have been given the videos for Z-remesher, but I don't want to talk about it in this. Well, if there are some questions about it later, I'll put it that way. We can talk about it later. But I don't want to talk about Z-remesher in our kit bashing workflow. So, okay. Let's see. Thomas, looks like Thomas is having some issues. Most of my work is designed for being manufactured, prototyped in CNC. Yes. Thomas, for your issue, we can talk a little bit more about that later, and that may even be something that we could talk about in one of our breakout sessions, because it really starts to get into workflows for 3D printing and that kind of thing. So, okay, so there's our discussion on topology. Now, we talked about in our kind of in the session last week, we talked about Dynamesh. Does everyone feel like you have a pretty good grasp on what Dynamesh is, or do you guys kind of want me to go over it again? Let me know, because I'm okay going over it. Let's see. All right, I'm getting a lot of people that are asking for a quick review. So let's do a real fast summary here, and let's load up our Polymesh 3D. Okay, grab a sphere, delete that guy. Okay, so Dynamesh. Geometry subpalette, go into my Dynamesh menu, and we see here we have this. We have a bunch of different sliders here. The most important, I would argue, is this resolution here, although this stuff gets really cool later on, right? And we're going to be talking about these buttons, and these buttons are going to be super useful for those of you who are already using Boolean operations, especially if you're, I know we have a couple people in this class who are into CNC milling and know their way around programs like Rhino and stuff like that. This area down here is going to be fun for you guys. But for right now, the most important thing is our resolution, and then we have all these options up here as well that we probably won't talk too much about because I know those were gone over. So I have a resolution of 128, and actually what I'm going to do so you guys can see the topology a little bit better, let's drop this guy down to 32 and Dynamesh. All right, so all Dynamesh is doing is it's taking topology basically on planes, right? And it's projecting it against my object and replacing the existing topology, right? So you can almost imagine, right, that you have this, man, I keep getting that circle, that you have this plane, right, that's sitting here, right? And this guy is projecting against this, right? This plane is evenly tessellated, right? And it's projecting against here, right? It's projecting against our sphere. And it's kind of creating that topology. And we can see even where the planes kind of change, right? So this is a plane here, this is another plane up here, a plane on the side as well, right? So that's sort of how that works. Now, the most important thing to remember, obviously if I turn my resolution up, right, and I read Dynamesh, and if I have Dynamesh turned on, I can Dynamesh again just by control dragging on the background of the document. I turn my resolution up, I'm going to get more polygons, right? It's going to be denser. What happens if I turn my resolution up and I do this, right? We're re-dynameshing. This is too dense now, right? I need something that's in the middle. I'll turn this down, do it again. I didn't see any change. This is an issue that a lot of people run into, right? There's no change. What you have to do is, if ZBrush isn't detecting any change at all to the mesh, right? If you have not modified your mesh at all, it will not re-dynamesh. So there's a couple ways to get around this. You could just move it around with a transpose real quick. I don't really recommend doing that. A lot of times what I would do is just run a real quick, just smooth, just like that, right? It's a fast smooth on it anywhere where it's not really going to make much of a difference. Control drag, and you'll see that the topology and the density changed again. Okay? Now, so you know what resolution does, but does anyone know the one thing that is probably the most important thing to remember about how resolution behaves? Anyone know? And I'll give you a hint. It's in the name, right here. Give me a shout out. Anyone know? Nope. Resolution in Dynamesh is dynamic. All right? That means that it's going to change depending on the size of the object in your scene. All right? So a resolution with the object being the size that it is right now is not going to be the same resolution at a lower scale, right? So let me, let's see. I think we'll stick with 128. All right. Can you guys see that pretty well? It's relatively dense, right? Well, it is dense. What happens, I'm going to press E, bring him on a transpose line, and we're just going to scale this guy down now. All right? We'll zoom in on him, and I'll re-Dynamesh. Look at how much lower my polygons have gone. That's the difference. That's what makes Dynamesh dynamic, right? It's always going to be dependent on the size of the object in your scene. Jose, yes, exactly. It depends on the scale relative to the world, precisely. So this can come into play. You know, this can be an issue depending on what you're bringing in, right? If you're importing an object, it could come in as huge. If you're importing an object, it could come in as tiny. So if I try to use Dynamesh on an object that's been imported from some outside program, I can easily start to run into issues where either my resolution comes up looking way too high or way too low, depending on the size of the object in my scene. One easy, quick way to deal with that, do I show you guys this now is the question. I think it may need to wait, but there's a really fast way to deal with that, and I know Ryan talks about it next week. Wayne, unify. Yes, you're right on the money, Wayne. Unify. All right? So, and there's a reason that unify, it's not that I don't want to show you the button, it's that I don't want to talk about what unify does just yet. All right? I don't want you guys' minds exploding on me today. Might just be too much information because I'm already introducing some things that we're already getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. So, okay. So that's kind of the gist of Dynamesh. Really quick, let's just talk about the group stuff. So if I, oops, not what I wanted. You may not be able to see that, but I do have separate polygroups there now. With the groups function on, control drag, it's going to try and keep those groups. Right? Turn it off, and it's not working the way that I want it to. Seems like ZBrush is being difficult with me right now. Interesting. Well, I guess I'm not showing you guys that right now. Generally speaking, you'll get different, it'll break out into different separate meshes, right? But not today, not right now. It's being difficult with us. Polish is just going to run a polish across the mesh. We also have blur here. That works particularly well if we have a really low resolution, right? There we go. Maybe that's what the problem was. I wasn't changing the mesh enough. Ran into the problem that I talked to you guys about earlier. How about that? There we go. And now it's a really low resolution, so it looks terrible. But it, you guys see what I'm talking about. It'll actually separate it into different pieces of geometry now. So blur, let's do this again with the groups function off so that it stays as one contiguous piece of mesh. if I go from here and I turn this way up and I have my project on and I use Dynamesh again, when it comes out, I'm going to shut because sometimes when this is running projection, the internet connection goes bad. And I've crashed ZBrush. Yay. You guys can probably hear me again though now, yeah? Yes, awesome. So this is a situation where I have overloaded ZBrush. So let's bring it back. Give me a second, guys. Unfortunately, this is just kind of part of using the program, right? Oh, here we go. All right, we're back. We're back. We're okay. Oh, man. All right, that was a close one. That was a close one. I'm kind of afraid to work with this guy now. All right. So as I said, let's just knock this back here a little bit. Try this again, and I'll try not to almost crash again this time. Okay, cool. So now I have a bunch of geometry in here, but it's keeping that low resolution detail, right? That's no good. I don't want that. So instead, what you could do, bring that back, you can turn this blur up. And this will actually refresh, right? So you don't actually have to do anything to the mesh, and the blur will rerun the Dynamesh, right? So, and this is even at such a high resolution that it's still, even with the blur, it's still retaining some of that detail. So this would be a situation where you have to go back down, but you understand what blur does. Okie doke. So let's get into the good stuff. So that's Dynamesh in a nutshell for what we need it for today. All right. Now, let's talk about our actual kit bashing exercise here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take some of the stuff that comes with ZBrush, some of the insert multi-meshes that come with ZBrush, and I'm going to use those to make a character. So basics of insert multi-mesh brushes. As the name says, it's just an insert brush with multiple mesh options. So you're already familiar with the insert sphere option, right? Ryan showed you guys that before. It's just a sphere, okay? Now what I want to do is talk about the IMM brushes, or insert multi-mesh brushes. You see you've got a bunch of them here inside of ZBrush, right? And every single one of these guys gives me multiple meshes that I can use with the same insert mesh brush. So we'll select this guy, and if I hit M, I have a menu that comes up of all of the different meshes that I can insert. Okay? So you're going to have a foot, you can have legs, you can have a hand, right? So that's really all we need to know for today. Like I said, we're going to talk about insert multi-mesh stuff a lot more in depth. I believe that's coming week 7. All right? So you're going to learn how to make your own. You're going to learn all of the stuff. You're going to learn how to make straps using insert multi-mesh, right? On curve mode and all this awesome stuff. All right? But for now, this is all I really want to talk about. So again, to get to this brush, all I did, I hit B to bring up my brush menu, I to narrow it down to my I brushes, right? And I found the Insert Multi-Mesh Toon brush right here. Okay? Then all I have to do is press M, and I see all the different meshes that I can choose from. Okay. So the first workflow that I want to show you using this brush to kind of kit bash off of is going to be using Dynamesh. So let's do a Dynamesh real quick. And then we're going to get into mesh replacement, which is awesome. Love mesh replacement. Okay. So first thing that I want to do is I actually want to get these legs, right? I like these quad legs. I want to get those, but I don't want to like draw it out and then split it out somehow, and that's no good. All I want is this. That's it. Anyone know how to get there? You shouldn't at this point. So I'll just tell you. If I go into geometry and modify topology, and we're going to click mesh from brush. Ta-da. We have our mesh, right? And this is just the mesh that I had selected. Okay? So now let's add a torso. I'll hit M. Let's put in a torso. Let's do this guy. Just draw it out. It's automatically masked out, so I'm just going to use my transpose line to get this guy a little bit closer to how I want him to be. Hit W, use my move transpose to give it some thickness. Again, still with the move. Grab this middle line, move it up here. All right. And he probably needs a little bit of width. So we're going to give him some width. All right. And this guy's going to be cartoony, so I'm not too worried about if it's really anatomically correct or not. Okay, so control drag. And I can already see that I need a higher resolution. So we're still way down. So I'm going to do this at I'm just going to try at 64. That's fine. It might actually be a little bit. No, that's totally fine. Okay. All right. So it's that easy, right? And now I'm just going to use my smooth brush. So let's integrate it a little bit. All right. Smooth things out here a little bit. Make it so that it kind of looks a little bit more like it's part of the same body, right? And in this stage, generally speaking, there's not a lot of sculpting to be had. Generally. A lot of times when you see centaurs, they have like this little gut here, I've noticed. And if you're wondering why I'm sculpting without symmetry on, there's not really any reason. Just personal choice right now. All right. That's good enough. All right. Let's get some arms in there. So I got to navigate back to my insert mesh brush, hold M again, or press M rather. You don't have to hold it. Let's grab an arm, do the muscular arm. I'm going to insert this guy, and I'm going to insert it on the left side of the model because I know that that's kind of how it gets drawn out. And actually I want to make sure symmetry is on for that. So let's redo that. So with symmetry on, it draws out my arm, right? And I did it from the left side because if I did it from the right side, watch what happens. It's going the wrong way, right? And it's mirrored on the other side, so they're both going the wrong way. Not what I want. So doing it from the left side, draw it out. This is just simple. We're going to use our transpose line again, right? This arm probably needs to be a little bit longer, so let's give it some length. Holding down Shift with the move, all right? I'm going to grab this end dot here and move it along my transpose line like that. Rotate it out so we get this guy in something closer to a T-pose. All right, still just rotating. All right, and use my move again just to bring it in. All right, and those arms are still short, so let's give it a little bit more length. All right, Control drag twice, and here we go. All right, this is going to require a little bit more sculpting to integrate it. So let's just come in here. And when I'm doing this, this integration, I'm purposefully using a brush that is topology independent. So I'm using my clay tubes brush because I don't want to be worrying about the way the topology is behaving. I'm actually trying to change the way the topology is behaving. So we'll just kind of do that. Dig in a little bit. Give him like kind of some armpits there. But I don't want to get too sculptural here. So get some arms in there. Worry about my delts here a little bit. Just building up. Remember, this isn't supposed to be sculpturally perfect just yet, right? And I don't really want to go in and sculpt on anything at all. I'm really just worrying about integrating it because I want to get to a point where I can sculpt, right? Charles, yes, clay buildup. You got it. All right. So all this basically really is I'm just taking a mesh that already exists and I'm adding it. This guy's torso is huge compared to, he looks more like a goat man than he does a centaur, doesn't he? Anyways, distractions. It's my inner critic coming out. Gotta be careful. In the middle of a demo. What a jerk. Anyways, so really what we're doing is we're just kind of taking stuff that already exists, adding it into our mesh using Dynamesh, and getting a base mesh really quickly, right? Something for us to work with really quickly. You'll see this happening on different levels. Sometimes people have insert multi-mesh brushes that have meshes that are very dense and very detailed. It's up to you. You know, you can make your own, and you can either slice up pieces of a previous model that you did, or, you know, I recommend making a bunch of your own custom-built insert multi-mesh brushes. It really gets useful, especially if speed is key, and especially if you're working in kind of the concept world. It becomes pretty important. So, okay, so that's the Dynamesh way of doing this, okay? Now, let's get in, let's talk a little bit about mesh replacement. So, before we do that, any questions on the Dynamesh stuff? Real quick. Any questions? Jose, no, that was not mesh replacement. Charles, I'm not going to answer that yet. Charles is asking, how do you make your own insert multi-mesh brush? Remember, I'm not showing you that today. I just want you guys to understand how to use them. That is coming, though. Don't worry. That is coming. Sometimes it causes holes. Sometimes Dynamesh causes holes. Is that what you're referring to, Joanna? Yes. Okay. Cool. Hold on a second, guys. I gotta take a drink real quick. Okay. So generally speaking, if Dynamesh causes any holes, it's because it doesn't have the resolution to support the thickness, or really the thinness of the mesh, or because ZBrush is reading your mesh as having 0 thickness. So when can this happen? I have clay buildup on right now. I'm going to sculpt my arm. And suddenly, look at what happened, right? Yeah, of course, this is super obvious right now. But let's say you're working on a face and you're sculpting the lip area, right? Well, if you're using a base mesh, chances are there's kind of a mouth sac, so to speak, on the interior of that, right? And a lot of times, if you're using clay buildup and it's too strong or you don't have backface masking on, you'll get this problem, or you could easily get this problem. So, and then, of course, when you go to Dynamesh, it's not cooperating. let's really overdo it here. Let's Dynamesh now. So you go to Dynamesh and you get all these holes and these problems and stuff, right? And it's because ZBrush doesn't understand that there's thickness happening here, right? It thinks that there's nothing there. So the way to get around that, first way to do it, is to just move this away from the, from the back, so that you can actually just kind of have thickness there, right? The second way, you can try to increase your resolution. With a higher resolution, a lot of times you'll be able to get that detail in there. But sometimes you have to go a step further and use ZBrush on it, or you kind of establish a workflow for yourself where you don't even have to worry about this generally, right? So start getting in the habit of working with backface masking on, and moving forward kind of with that understanding that I need to make sure that there's some thickness to these pieces, or else my Dynamesh isn't going to act the way that I want it to. All right? Okay, Roberto. Yes, every time I insert a piece in this method, I Dynamesh every time. You don't have to. You can easily do it the same way that Ryan showed you guys how to do it on Saturday, right? He kind of inserts everything piece by piece and then Dynameshes once at the end. That's fine too. There's nothing wrong with it. You can do it either way. Let's read some of you guys' questions here. Yep. A lot of people talking about backface masking. Yep. Cool. Backface masking. Where do you find backface masking? Brush, auto masking, and then turn on backface mask. All right? If I remember right, it doesn't work fantastically with the with this brush. Oh, it does. It works pretty well. But that's where you find it. Okay. Let's see. Projection with Dynamesh. Kurt, I am not totally sure. Oh, you're talking about this button right here? This project button? Or are you talking about projecting up subdivisions? Oh, from one mesh to another. Can I show you that? Probably. I have to be careful because I really don't want to get too far ahead, you guys. But let me put that down. If we have time, I'll show that to you. Projection. Although it's probably a little bit far ahead. Okay. Let's see. Patrick, and I have no problem going over the transpose a little bit more at the end here. All right. But first, let's do mesh replacement. So I'm going to start again. I'm going to append in a new object. And by the way, do you guys know the trick for switching between subtools? without going over here, do you know, anyone know the trick? Alt-click. Jose's got it. Alt-click. Turn the visibility of that guy off. All right. So we're going to do this again. B, I, O for my tune. M. And let's see. This time we'll start with, let's use base legs. Geometry. Close the Dynamesh. Modify topology. Mesh from brush. Hit M again. Let's do torso. We'll do a torso first. All right. Let's make sure the Dynamesh is off. Draw in the torso. That looks kind of big. It's all right though. Just using the transpose line again. R for rotate. I'm just going to rotate that a little bit. Transpose it down. Okay. I'm going to invert my mask as well. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is turn perspective off real quick. Use my transpose line. I want to get this thing kind of close to the middle. I'm just using my move. That's pretty good. Let's invert the mask. Control click on the background of the document. I'm going to use my move transpose again and draw out from the middle. And hold shift and use this end dot to kind of move it in like that. Right? And let me point this out to you. If I hit Shift F, look at all the polygroups I have. This mesh is set up specifically so that I can use this method, so I can use the mesh replacement method. All right? So what I'm going to do now, my Dynamesh is off. All right? I'm going to right-click on this polygroup right here at the top because I want this polygroup to connect to this open hole that is part of the mesh, right? So I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm just going to move around, right? All that's going to do is rotate. But it makes it so that ZBrush now knows that, okay, this polygroup right here, this is the active polygroup as far as ZBrush is concerned. All right? So this is the polygroup that's going to be replaced to fill in any holes. So now all I'm going to do, Control drag, and that did not work the way that I wanted it to. So let's do that again. Right-click on this guy, Control drag, and then you get it fill in the gaps there. All right? So now this is all part of one piece of mesh, right? I'm going to turn my symmetry back on. Or just smooth this guy out a little bit. And it's really as simple as that. It kind of smooths it a little bit already, right? How about a head? Let's put in a head. M, let's grab a head, come up to the top, we'll draw it in. All right, big old head. Rotate him just a little bit. Move him forward just a little bit. Come in here and hit Q to drop into draw mode. All right. Right-click and move around. This is my active polygroup. Control drag 2 times. Smooth it out. I'm just tapping with the smooth brush over here. These polygons are really big and I don't want it to change too much. All right. So now we have a head integrated. Now let's do a little trick. So every time this happens, you guys see that it actually literally creates mesh and bridges the gap between the active polygroup and the mesh that I've inserted. Okay? So now, let's make some arms. But I want to make my arms, we're just going to use hands. And let's see what happens. We'll draw out a hand. I can use my move transpose, bring the hands out. R for rotate. I'm just going to rotate them down a little bit. All right. Q again to drop into draw mode. And I want it to connect to this polygroup right here, right? I want this polygroup to connect to my hands. Right click, again. That's my active polygroup. Control drag, and I have arms. All right? And all I need to do is a little bit of cleanup. Right? And it's easy to get toon arms really fast. Right? And not even toon arms, I wouldn't have to do much sculpting to get these arms to look relatively realistic. Right? Heck, I could dynamesh this, I could Z-remesh this. In fact, I probably would want to Z-remesh it anyways, right? Because I have uneven tessellation in the torso compared to everything else. So suddenly, we can create mesh really fast using some of these kit bashing methods and in conjunction with mesh replacement, right? So questions about mesh replacement before we open the floor up to Q&A. Any questions? Patrick is asking, how do you align the transpose to X, Y, or Z? So I draw out the transpose line, hit W for move, draw it out. If I want to align it to any specific world axis, all I have to do is tap on these axes, right? So if green is Y, so it'll align the transpose line to Y. X to X, Z, right? All right, let's see other questions here. Looks like we got a bunch. Give me a second here, guys. Let's see. Jose, I think I answered your question. I hope I did. About why are there polygroups also in the arms and neck? If not, let me know. Mark, polygroups are for virtually separating a complex mesh into areas that are to be handled individually. Exactly. You got it right on the head there. Charles, is right-click the same as control-click for Mac? Not, to my knowledge, as far as ZBrush is concerned, no. No. As far as Macs in general are concerned, yes. But I think the rules change when you're in ZBrush. Let's see. When was mesh replacement introduced? I think, I want to say it was 4R4. But don't quote me on that. What's the result if you don't have polygroups set up for kit bashing? The result is kind of catastrophic, right? You have to have polygroups set up. So let's say this guy is all one polygroup. So we'll go polygroups, say autogroup. So this guy's all one polygroup, and then I try and draw out, some hands. If I control drag, oops, hold on a minute. There we go. control drag, it's not going to do anything, right? Or what's worse, I can have a polygroup set up down here, and and you can run into this problem pretty easily. If I forget to do the whole right click to make sure this is the active polygroup thing, right? And out here is the active, you know, if I, hold on a second, I actually have to undo all that because it won't work after a given time. So let's do this again. Control W. Let's draw out this, do a little move, get it to move away a little bit, right? Suddenly it keeps this polygroup, but everything else gets replaced. That's all screwed up, right? So if you ever run into a problem like this, where it's kind of left you like, you know, well, what the heck am I doing wrong? This could easily be one of those things that you're doing wrong, right? And you want to be careful too, because if you decide that you're going to try and be super savvy and have like one polygroup for one face, chances are you're really going to get some problems. If you just want one face to extrude out and meet out here, it could easily be pretty difficult for you. Not to say it's not possible. I'm sure it's possible, but it could easily be a pain. Okay, more questions. Let's see. If we want to do our own mesh replacement on our own insert brushes, you have to first paint out the polygroups. Yes, Jose. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, you also have to make sure that you have holes in the mesh, right? So if I want to insert a hand, I will need to make sure that there's a hole at the base of the hand. Not only do I need to make sure that there's a specific polygroup set up in an arm or in a torso, but I also need to make sure that the holes are in the right places, right? Because that's how the mesh is going to be connecting itself. Okay. Let's see, is mesh replacement from Kurt? Is mesh replacement the bridging of geometry or adding the new brush parts? I'm not totally sure what you mean by that, but it really is. Oh, I do understand what you mean. So the mesh replacement occurs after the new brush parts have already been added. And it's literally what the mesh replacement is it's replacing the existing polygroup with the geometry that's now bridging the gap. All right. Just reading down through more questions here. Rick is still a little bit confused about the transpose. And I think actually now, I think with the transpose thing, maybe it's good for us to officially kind of open the floor up for more questions. So let's actually get into the Q&A portion. And if anyone has, if I see any more questions about these, the mesh replacement stuff, I will come back to it without a problem. But so Rick is saying that sometimes when he uses his move, undo all that. Oh, there is one thing I forgot to show you guys. So we'll come back in a second here. Another cool little trick. So what you're saying is sometimes you're trying to move it around and it gets all stretchy. Like that? Or is it like this, where you move it like this and it gets all stretchy? In the first case, it's because symmetry is on, right? So my transpose line is symmetrical right now. Symmetry is on, so I'm getting that, right? If I just hit X and turn symmetry off, now I can move it around. All right, and it's important this middle on the move transpose, this middle guy is, you know, that's the move, moving, basically transposing the mesh around as a whole piece, as a without actually modifying the topology at all or messing with the sculpt at all. This, however, is going to stretch it, right? this guy in the end. That's going to stretch him, right? And if I grab the closest, it's actually going to clip. So it creates basically a flat plane. That one, I know that one may have just blown your mind a little bit. Don't worry. It's coming. It's coming. Next week, we'll be talking about that a little bit more. So real quick, before we really get into the question stuff, there's one more thing that I want to show you guys. And it's how to poke a hole in the mesh using mesh replacement. So let's do this really fast. Let's say, let's grab a cylinder from up here. Let's go to initialize. And if this stuff is like Greek to you, don't worry. Just ignore what I'm doing right now if that's the case. It's okay. Make polymesh 3D. And I'm going to do a real quick polygroups, group by normal. Grab this guy, grab that guy. Geometry. This is just the setup, guys, so don't get freaked out if you're like not following. Not a big deal. Delete hidden, because this is all stuff that you're going to know how to do soon. All right? And now, all right. So let's say I just have this thing, all right? I just threw a bunch of new stuff at you just in that. But let's pretend like I already had this brush, all right? And I want to make a hole through the middle of this guy for whatever reason, right? Reason doesn't matter. Let's just say I want to make a hole. Well, the first thing that I want to do is make myself a polygroup that sticks to that region. All right, so I have my polygroup. In fact, let's make the polygroup quite a bit larger than that. So let's go here, let's go there, Control W, I have myself a new polygroup. Now I'm going to draw this guy out, but I'm going to hold Alt. And what Alt is going to do is it's actually going to change the direction of the normals. All right, so it's going to basically mean that ZBrush is going to understand this object as something that is facing inwards. The faces are facing inwards, right? So for this, that's not going to help me at all. Use my transpose. I'm just going to stretch it out a little bit here. All right, let's use the rotate and just get it so that it's, we know that it's well within that poly group. Great, great, great. Okay. And now, use my move. Let's bring it in so that it'll actually sit inside of this guy's body, right? We don't really want to poke now at the end like that. So again, just a little bit more from, so we're just scaling it in using the move, transpose, that's it. It's not really scaling so much. All right? Make this my active polygroup. Control click 2 times, and I've replaced it now with my oddly off-center hole. All right, so if you ever get to a point where you kind of need this extra space here, this is the way to go, right? If you don't want to use Dynamesh or whatever, right? Good way to go. Okay? Cool, cool, cool. Okie doke. So, back to our questions. What if the normals of the cylinder were pointing outwards? It would try to connect the mesh to the inside, right? It would basically, it wouldn't work the way that you want it to work, is essentially what it boils down to. So you want to make sure that you're drawing it out with that Alt held down. Okay. Cool. So more questions. Let's look at some questions and we'll do a few little demos here. Let's see. Georgie, you're welcome. Let's see. Thomas, yeah, when I masked out, I made a polygroup, and all that was just holding down Control, masking out an area, and I just did Control W, and I made that into its own polygroup. All right. Rick, I'm glad that that cleared things up for you on the transposed. Okay. All right, so if you guys have any more questions, feel free to put them out there now, and we'll go through them. Thomas, differences between subtools and polygroups. Okay, so that's a good question. Let's talk about that. So, a subtool. Let me undo what I just did. And where a lot of times I think some of the confusion happens. So, if I draw this in, if I draw that sphere in, all right, and I clear this mask, is that sphere a polygroup or a subtool? Polygroup. Yes, polygroup. It is a polygroup and only a polygroup. The difference being it is part of the same tool, right, or the same subtool, a different subtool, right? So right now, the way that I have this set up, these two guys are different subtools. All right, a polygroup, the biggest difference between a polygroup and a subtool are their intended function, okay? A polygroup is meant as a tool for mesh organization. So, and it kind of goes back to exactly what Mark said earlier. Polygroups are really intended to isolate parts of the same subtool, of a single subtool, into different areas that can be worked on independently of each other, right? So let's say, for instance, let me get that sphere out of there. Let's say I wanted to work on the head without having any of this other stuff around, right? I could easily make that its own polygroup and isolate it out, right? That's just by Control-Shift clicking, right? Control-Shift drag to invert my selection. This is all stuff that we've gone over this week, and I'm sure is nothing new for you guys. But that's what a polygroup really is. It's intended to be a tool for mesh organization. And the idea is to make it as organic as possible, make mesh organization as organic as possible, and not take you out of that sort of artistic experience, that sculptural experience that you get with ZBrush. On the other hand, a subtool, what is, and I kind of want you guys to answer this, what is the biggest reason subtools exist? What is the purpose for subtools? Aaron's got it. More polygons. More polygons, yes. So ZBrush has a limit of how many polygons it can handle per subtool, right? And this goes back to that story that Ryan tells about the Dragon movie, right? If that rings a bell. So, yeah, some people will use it as a tool for organizing their mesh, but in reality, it's meant to get past that polygon limit. So, for instance, I know right now I'm working on a machine that's a little bit outdated, right? We have a limit here of probably around somewhere between 6 and 12 million polygons, right? I don't really want to go much above that because otherwise this computer will start chugging on me, right? And I run the risk of crashing. So what happens when I get to the detail phase and my mesh up here, you know, on my face, I could easily get to 6 million polygons just on the face alone if I want to get down to the pore level detail. So what I would do is I would start splitting things up a little bit, right? If for nothing else than just to bake out the maps, right? So you may split things into different subtools at the end after you've kind of already sculpted everything. It just depends on your workflow. Not something that I would recommend. I would kind of plan ahead for it. But you'll start thinking that way naturally as you get more and more experience. So now if I separate these polygroups into different subtools, I can get up to 6 million polygons on each individual subtool, which means that if I need a lot of resolution on my head, I can get 6 million polygons on my head alone. And then the rest of the body maybe in total is 6 million polygons, right? So the biggest reason that subtools even exist is to increase that polygon count, in a sense, the total polygon count that you can have in your project. So I hope that kind of clears it up for you. Aaron, you can merge down. Yes. Yep. Cool. That was just an answer to Gilong. Okay. More questions.
A couple of people were asking if you can turn polygroups into subtools.
For sure. Yeah, I'll show you how to do that right now. So let's do this and, whoops, this is fine. All right, so we got a couple different subtools here. So all I really need to do, grab that, come to my subtool, subpalette, split hidden. Now my body and my head are different subtools. Do the same thing for the arm. Split hidden. Right? If these were different pieces, of mesh, you could do a split to parts kind of deal, right? Which gets really kind of nice for the hard surface stuff. And you'll see the split to parts magic later on when we start talking about things like panel loops. Okay. More questions? Feel free to shout out as well, Kevin, if you've seen any that have kind of been repeated. All right, let's see. If there's memory limitations, how Do you render a full scene at high res with lots of scene elements? Well, you can actually have multiple very high resolution subtools active and visible at the same time. There is some degradation after a little while if you get way high kind of in your total polygons that are in the project. You are going to start having some issues, right? So I know, like on this machine, for instance, if I were to go and get to the point where I had like 50 million polygons total, I'm going to have an issue, right? It's going to take forever to load. It's not going to like me come render time, you know. If I just want to get a VPR out of ZBrush, it's going to be difficult, right? But that said, you know, you can still have all these different pieces visible even at high subdivisions. Okay, so what I want to do is get some of these demos for you guys real quick here, because we are actually kind of getting to the point where we're going to be running out of time. So let's get into some of this stuff. I got a question from Steve about, he was asking essentially, how do you get it to the point where, like, let's say I have a certain camera angle that I want to render at. How do I save that camera angle? So the easiest thing to do for that is going to be, I'm just going to come up here to the movie palette and go timeline and show. All right? I'm just going to click on my timeline twice. And move the camera. Let's say I like that camera angle. I'll move here, do all my sculpting and whatever I need to do, right? And we come back, and actually, you have to have the camera angle before you make the, so when you click on the timeline again, it'll save that camera angle. So I can come in here, you know, sculpt all over this guy, right? Do whatever I'm going to do. Click on this key on the timeline, and I have my camera angle back. All right, so that's the easiest way to do that, is just to use the timeline. Okay, the next was, you'll have to forgive me, I forget who asked at the beginning. Someone was asking if there's a brush that creates topology, and there is. Nothing like, I think, kind of what you were thinking of. It's not something where you can just sculpt and it adds topology wherever you're sculpting, right? But I can come in and use this guy. This is just a topology brush. It'll make curves, right? And I'm going to bump up my draw size so that the, hold on a second here, guys. It is bugging out on me. All right. Anyways, I lost my body. Anyways, so I can come in here. We'll do it on this guy instead. Draw, I'm going to turn symmetry off. Draw a curve. Another curve. And wherever these curves intersect, where they make a quad, it's actually going to create topology there, right? So this brush, technically speaking, will create topology for you, right? And then just tap on the mesh, and it'll literally bring that up as a piece of mesh. But nothing like if you were using clay buildup, and clay buildup was just adding faces. You can't do that for sure. It's definitely not something that is doable right now. Okay, we covered the subtool thing. Projection, I don't really, I'm afraid the projection is going to be a little bit too confusing just now. And I really kind of would rather be safe and not get into it just yet. So sorry. I think that projection is going to have to wait until one of our breakout sessions and we can talk about it. Thomas, yeah, this is a great way to do any hard surface armor pieces and stuff like that. So yeah, for sure. Let's see, Gilang. Last exercise, you inserted the eyes into the model. The resolution seemed low, even though you increased the subdivision. Everything else looks more crisp, though, except the eyes. So I am not sure how you added the eyes in. If you added the eyes in as a separate subtool, then you have to remember that each subtool has its own settings, right? So if I hit Control D, and I won't, let's undo the topology brush. If I hit Control D, that's going to up my subdivisions on this tool, but notice that it hasn't done anything to the head at all, right? Each individual subtool is separate. So if your eyes are separate subtools, you're going to have to go to the separate subtool and divide up there manually, right? It's not going to do it across the board. So that may have been the issue. The other issue that you can sometimes run into is, let's say you added in a sphere for the eyes, right? And you wanted to sculpt on this, so you just inverted your mask, and then you Control D, right? Suddenly, my subdivisions are getting higher in through here, right? I can see that this is tessellating a lot more, but this isn't changing. It's because you have the mask on. And we'll also automatically turn off visibility. Not visibility, sorry, smoothing. Right? So if you have a mask applied to your mesh, it's meant to be a method where you can actually add more tessellation to a certain area. Right? So if I was just building this guy out and I wanted a little bit more geometry in here, I could just go Control D, I get more geometry, right? So that may also be what's happening for you. Can you close the gap at the bottom of the head, which is a separate subtool? Yeah, sure. That's just as simple as coming in. Geometry, there's a few different ways you can do this. One way is just to close holes, right? You have to do it on a mesh that doesn't have any subdivisions, though. Close holes, and there you go. It is closed now. You could also dynamesh it. You could also use a bridge function. There's all kinds of ways you can do it, but that's how I would do it. If you're looking to close the holes, you either do it that way or you just dynamesh straight out of the box, right? And it'll close the holes for you. Alrighty. So let's see here. We can go down through. This is, I think, all of the questions. I had one question from Brian. Brian, you sent me a question a little bit earlier. You're wondering if I can talk about layers, different layers on each subtool, and the equivalent of Boolean union. Okay. So the Boolean union function is really as simple as using Dynamesh, right? It's really that simple. You can add two objects in together, into one subtool, Dynamesh, and you've got it all as one mesh now, right? So if you're worried about 3D printing or something like that, you know, that's how you would do it. Now our goat boy has a huge tumor on the side. No good. Okay. And then as far as the layer system works with the different subtools, let's see, Brian, are you in here right now? I don't think you are. Each individual, as I mentioned before, each individual subtool does have its own sets of sort of modifiers, right, that are separate from any other subtool. So I can have a layer on this subtool, right, sculpt on it, right, in recording mode, or do whatever on it. And I can go to a different subtool and create a different layer there as well, and they are totally independent of each other, right? The only thing is, if I want to get to a point where I can actually bring these subtools together into one big subtool, I need to bake the layers in, or it'll do it automatically, right? Okay, am I missing any questions? You can help me out here, Kevin, because otherwise I'm probably going to cut you guys loose.
Yeah. Actually, Roberto just asked one real quick, and if you want, I mean, I can read that off to you. Even if you have gaps from one mesh to another, Dynamesh doesn't work very well unless you created the polygroups, right? That's Roberto's.
Oh, yeah. Dynamesh isn't going to bridge between the two. You would actually have to create a separate mesh, which you could do easily just by using the methods that you learned from Ryan, right? You could just insert a sphere or insert a cylinder and make that kind of bridge the gap, Dynamesh, and sculpt it out or smooth it out however you need to in order to make that that gap get filled the way that you want it to be filled. But just Dynamesh alone isn't going to bridge those gaps for you. It'll make it two separate pieces. So, G.
Thomas. Oh,
yeah. Sorry. G. Yeah, we are going to be covering gun stuff, hard surface stuff. I believe there's something on adding clothes to characters, but I'm not totally sure. That's more of a sculptural thing, but I actually do have a demo where I'll be showing you guys how to create basically the revolving piece from a revolver using only Boolean operations for the most part and a few other little hard surface tricks. Let's see, Thomas. Can we have a ZBrush for CNC production breakout session? The breakout sessions I don't think are going to be themed in that sense, although I'm happy to cover some of the things. But really, if you're talking about using it for CNC or using it for 3D printing, it really becomes a very large topic, right? And it's something that if you're interested in, you know, maybe Thomas, you and I can kind of have a discussion on our own, and I can point you to some really cool resources that you might find really super useful. So.
Jose's been asking for a while if they are able to still sign up for the breakout sessions.
Oh, Jose, yeah, sorry. The breakout sessions right now, I believe, are totally full, but we are going to be adding more. So what's going to happen is I'm going to be talking with Ryan a little bit later on, like late afternoon today, and we're going to figure out when we can add more sessions for you guys. Once we get that figured out, I'm going to send you all an email just so you can all know when the session is and to go take a look and sign up if you can. If we need to add more, then we'll just keep adding more, right? But right now, even though you technically you can still sign up. There's nowhere to sign up. There's no room anywhere. But we'll be addressing that this afternoon, most likely. So look for an update on that soon. Okay. Let's see. Roberto, this is actually a really good question. He's asking, in a way, is Dynamesh junk topology? And it depends on who you ask, right? If you ask someone who's worried more about production topology, and even if not, they might say that Dynamesh is junk topology, right? But for our purposes, generally speaking, it's good for sculpting on, as long as you're doing it right and you know how to get around some things, right? Like for instance, if I come in, let's take a look at this guy, Shift F. I'm probably going to get to a point where even at higher subdivisions, I'll get pinching, right? So let's go. Just up these a little bit. Oh, sorry, let me delete that layer. Alrighty. So we get kind of up into this area here, and I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but I kind of have these pock marks. Can you guys see that on my screen? Yep, good. So once you get up into the higher subdivisions and you're trying to refine some of the detail, a lot of times it's good to get out of Dynamesh, to not be using the Dynamesh mesh anymore. I'd recommend at a certain point you want to switch over to using the like a ZBrush mesh instead. But if you are working on this and you kind of decide that you want to stick with it and use the Dynamesh version, but you have to get around this, you'll notice that if I smooth, I'm holding Shift and smoothing, and it's kind of making it worse, right? The way to get around this, if I hold down Shift, I click, and let go Shift, right? Suddenly all those pock marks are disappearing. All right, so that's a little a trick for you to get around some of the weird things that can happen with Dynamesh. But yeah, Roberto, great question. Like I said, it depends on who you ask. In my book, it's not junk topology. It's sculptural topology. But it's going to change depending on who you talk to. The shift trick, Wayne, it's meant to be that way. When you let go of shift, it changes the algorithm of the smooth. Basically, it changes how the smooth works, right? And it goes along the normals. So it'll find the kind of average normal direction and smooth according to that. Okay. All right. Question about polygroups. Hold on, I just lost you. Can a polygon belong to more than one polygroup? No. Is it possible to save masks or create something like a selection? Yes. Yeah. You can basically save selections or save masks. I do recommend using polygroups, but there may be some situations where you just need to save masks. That gets super complicated, but you can do it. And it's so complicated that I'm not even going to show you until we get to like week 10. So if that's still a question that you have, you can ask me at the end of the course, like week 10, week 11, in that area, and I'll show you. But it's very complicated. And it requires you have to have a model that has UVs, and you got to save out, you know, textures in a certain way, and it gets kind of messy. You really got to want it, right? those saved masks need to be super important for you to have, for you to really go out of your way to save the masking groups, so to speak. Let's see, does refresh Dynamesh reconstruct the topology or add to the poly count? It reconstructs the topology. Every time that you re-Dynamesh, it is literally reconstructing the topology every single time. Which is why you want to be very mindful of the difference between just upping your Dynamesh resolution and hitting Control-D and dividing. All right? You don't want to use Dynamesh and just get it higher and higher and higher subdivisions. Usually that's kind of it's a problematic workflow because you're losing control over the larger forms because you're losing all those lower subdivisions, right? So you can go back, you can get those subdivisions back if you use the remesher and combination of different things. So something, I guess you just kind of want to be mindful of it. You don't want to up your Dynamesh resolution in lieu of just dividing your geometry. Roberto, yes, this class is recorded and will be up and available for you guys within the next 24 to 48 hours. All right, Wayne, should we generally not hold shift down when smoothing for better results? It depends. If you're smoothing around an edge, no. Right, you're going to want to hold shift because otherwise it's going to create some weird things happening around that edge because of the way it works, right? It's looking at the normals, and if it's seeing that you have an edge that's at 90 degrees, it's going to try and sort of really smooth that out in sort of a weird, like bowed out sort of way. It ends up looking kind of strange. You just want to be careful. Play around with it in different situations, and you'll kind of get your own bearings as far as when to use it and when not to use it. Gee, yes, we are going to be covering the slice brushes. They are coming. Masking and splitting them into separate subtools. Yep, it's all coming. That's going to be part of our hard surface lectures. ZBrush is powerful enough to create small topology like hand and foot parts. We have to do it manually. It is powerful enough to create the smaller parts, and in fact, ZBrush is my go-to sort of utility for that kind of thing. If you use a kit bashing method like what we talked about today, you get down to the point where you have hands and feet with separate toes and fingers, you're going to need your Dynamesh resolution to be pretty high to support that. Or it's going to be a situation where you're going to have varying levels of tessellation all across your model if you're using mesh replacement. So what I tend to do is as soon as I get it in, let's say I'm using Dynamesh and I'm in a high resolution for my Dynamesh, I will take that tool and ZRemesh it so that I can have the lower subdivisions back, but ZRemesher will still hold all of that detail for the fingers and toes and all that kind of stuff. Charles, kit bashing. So what is kit bashing? It's essentially just taking things that already exist, taking a model that already exists, and using it for another purpose, in a sense, right? So taking an arm model that already exists and use it for maybe a creature that I'm working on, right? That's sort of the essence of kit bashing. I think it really has evolved from the first time that I ever really heard people use the term kit bashing was more in the practical effects world, where you would take something and make it look like something completely different, but you're basically using it as a base to work off of and modify and, you know, work forward like that. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think, am I missing any other big ones, Kevin? I think that I got...
No, not that I saw. We got pretty much all of them there.
Cool, cool. All right, guys. Well, it is getting late. We are running, getting close to running over. So I want to let you guys go. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. Again, remember, be looking in your email later on today, because I will most likely be emailing you guys before I leave the office tonight, and giving you all an update on the breakout sessions for those of you who are still looking to sign up. So, in fact, what's actually going to help me right now, give me a comment in the chat box if you want to sign up but haven't been able to yet. You want to sign up for a breakout session, but you haven't been able to because it's full. So I'm going to assume there's not that many of you. So I'll probably just start with one. Let's see. Actually, we got, let's see, how many? That's a lot. Okay, so we're probably going to need, I'm assuming we're going to need 2 more, most likely. We can kind of start from there. Thomas, I believe you are signed up, but double check the spreadsheet. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we're going to have 2. So stay tuned. I'll get back to you guys about that later on today. And from there, if you guys have any questions, run into any problems or anything like that, you know how to get a hold of me. Other than that, I think I can kind of let you guys go. I hope you all have an awesome rest of your week. Have a nice Thursday. For some of you, I think it's actually Friday at this point. So if so, happy Friday. And I will talk to you all very shortly. I'll shoot you guys an email pretty soon here. So, all right, guys, have a good evening. I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks for coming out.
The organized